Hey, it's Brian.
It's Barry.
Nate here.
Thought you were going to pull my move on me.
Change
Welcome to the Collecti-Bros podcast. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing one of the NES holy grails, and that is Bubble Bobble Part 2. The Part 2 is very important. You'll see why later. So before we get started into this episode, I'd like to invite you guys to follow us on our social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are Collecti-Bros Pod on all platforms. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when we have new episodes drop. And we do post content every couple days on social media. Just to cover some basics for this game, this was released for the NES March 5th, 1993. And if you guys don't know, that is very late into the console's life cycle. The Super Nintendo was already out for 2 years at this point. So this is an NES exclusive, which is interesting because there are other games out there called Bubble Bobble II, but as previously discussed, this is Bubble Bobble Part 2. There's a Game Boy game with the exact same name that released, I think it was like a couple days before this one, or maybe it was a couple weeks or whatever. I didn't find it in my notes, but it's actually a different game. It has the same name in North America, but the rest of the world refers to that game as Bubble Bobble Jr. Has a different story, and obviously, like I just said, around the world it has a different name, so it's unrelated. This is an exclusive one-of-one NES game.
Was this game re-released digitally anywhere?
Negative. The only way you can play this game is if you buy this ungodly expensive cart.
RIP.
Was it in any compilations?
Nope.
Okay.
Which is, I'm shocked they haven't done like a Bubble Bobble, compilation, because there's way more games in this series than I originally thought. Just to clarify, there are 16 Bubble Bobble games, 6 Rainbow Island / Parasol Star games, 33 Puzzle Bobble / Bust a Move games, and 21 random spin-offs. You would need like 4 Switch carts, bro.
I knew it was like a big series, but God, those numbers are huge. I didn't realize there was that many of them. Is that counting like ports to other stuff or just individual games?
Mainline games.
Some of those are arcade only though, right?
Right, yeah. Well, there's a lot of the early ones are strictly Neo Geo cartridges.
That is so wild. I knew it was a long-running series, but my God.
Well, I adore this series, just to let you all know. And one of my collecting goals is to get every game in this series. And I saw that and was like, well, shit. Yeah, I had no idea. But the lore is actually surprisingly deep for this series. We're talking like Metal Gear levels of lore here where it just gets wild and wild. Not so much with the actual story. Let's just, for convenience sake, say that there's 3 diverging paths of mainline series for this game, right? You have, obviously, Bubble Bobble. This is the one that you guys know and love, the arcade version. It's, arcade gameplay. Came out in the arcade. The NES home port is beloved. I know a lot of people overseas played it on different types of PCs, but that's the one that most people are familiar with as Bubble Bobble. Bubble Bobble II, which is the story of Bubble Bobble II, is actually Rainbow Islands. Again, it's another arcade game. There was an NES port, so people might be familiar with it. You're actually the main characters from the Bubble Bobble series in human form. And for some reason, you shoot rainbows. I don't know the lore that well. Not like an Elder Scrolls master here on the lore for Bubble Bobble, but it is actually, in fact, called The Story of Bubble Bobble 2. Not Part 2, just 2. The third game is Parasol Stars. Uncommon game, one I actually really want because I love collecting for the TurboGrafx. No arcade port for that. It's literally just PCs and the PC Engine, and there isn't an NES port for it. It's completely different gameplay than even Rainbow Island. You can still play as humans, but I could go on and on for the lore for these games. But the main thing that you guys need to understand is that there's 3 diverging paths or gameplays. 2 of them you're playing as humans, different gameplay styles, and 1 of them you are bubble dragons popping bubbles, all right? Now, where it gets really tricky and really confusing, and you gotta start...
It's not already?
Dude, no, it gets way worse. So worse. Like, I was trying to do notes for this, and I was, like, scratching my head. I'm like, did I just slip into a different timeline? Like, what the hell's going on? The real shit kicker is that in Europe, the game's known as Bubble Bobble 2. Like, we already have a Bubble Bobble 2. It's Rainbow Islands. So, okay, whatever. We can take that L, figure it out. It's only in Europe. Part 2 was actually released before that on the NES in the States. So, dude, it gets so stupid. Bubble Memories was released in arcades in 1996, and guess what this one's called? Bubble Bobble 3. You know, just like Paracel Stars. So it gets wild, man. Like it's
My
so...
brain has just turned to mush.
Oh, and this is literally just the surface. Once you start getting into like different, you know, sub games and stuff, it gets wild. But
What's interesting with like the early Final Fantasy games, the numbers are weird because they weren't released in our region because the genre wasn't a known success in America yet. But it's like clearly this is a popular series, and like worldwide they just decided to release certain ones at certain times. It's kind of a weird thing. I get why Final Fantasy got confusing because we have a huge gap in missing games, but like these were popular, and there's, like you said, there's 3 spin-offs, so it's weird to just like pick and choose what to call Bubble Bobble.
Well, I mean, even now Final Fantasy isn't confusing anymore.
No, they cleaned that up.
Stranger of
cleaned
Paradise
it-
solved
yeah.
all of it.
They cleaned it up. They solved the issue. Nobody really refers to 3 as 6 and 6
Right.
as 3. It's 6. So like they did the work in correcting it, but it's also because that's a super popular
Correct.
franchise. Like Bubble Bobble's not. So
I mean, you don't get
Yeah,
what,
it wasn't
60
its
games?
heyday. It's weird though because there's still games coming out now, but like Taito eventually closed its doors. So it was like I hate to say it, they were kind of like the Activision at a time where they had this mega hit in the arcade and they just ported it to everything and they did spin-offs and they sucked that thing dry. It's interesting though for the name change. I know this happened a lot back then, especially in the arcade times and the NES times. There wasn't a lot of communication between, you know, the Japan offices and North America offices, and a lot of studios just had, you know, like Nintendo had Nintendo America and Nintendo Japan, but like Taito was literally just doing it by themselves globally, and they probably just had translators. I cannot find anything concrete, but it's interesting when we get to the story part of it, you'll really see where it gets even more like these people clearly did not communicate. As far as development for this game, it was really thrown to the wolves. Like I previously discussed, it was released 2 years into the SNES's life, which is wild because, I mean, nobody was picking this up. And it's weird, like the original Bubble Bobble is such a beloved, such a popular game for the NES. And just to have like, hey, we're finally going to do a sequel, like, why didn't they just make this thing for Super Nintendo? I couldn't really find anything concrete why they didn't do that. But if you guys are familiar with some of the more expensive games on the NES, Taito's got some heat. They were all low print. They were all, you know, limited release, tough to find, late in the life cycle. I know like Panic Restaurant comes to mind. I saw a list somewhere where it was like all of the Taito games that were late release for the NES are a minimum of like $300, and it's wild. Like literally half of the NES games are $300 or more for Taito for NES. It's crazy. So there's kind of like this aura, I guess you could say, about Taito on the NES specifically. But they really released games late for the NES and supported it, even though the Super Nintendo was out. And they actually had games come out like close to launch for the Super Nintendo, so there's not really a definitive excuse. The only thing I can think of was developing this. Taito developed the Game Boy version, I guess you can say, Bubble Bobble Jr. Taito actually developed that. This was developed by ITL Co. Limited, which sounds like the most made-up development company ever. But they actually worked on a couple other NES games and Game Boy Advance port. Like they did the Game Boy Advance port for Sean Palmer snowboarding. Like it's not that recent, but you get what I'm saying. So they were around for a while. They were more of a support developer, and that's why they kind of just got fed this cast off of a thought of a game because Taito was working on the Game Boy port, and the Game Boy was such a monstrous success. I kind of don't blame them, but still, like my gut tells me this would have done very well on Super Nintendo instead of just being thrown to the wolves on NES.
Do you know what they put out on Super Nintendo instead of this? You said they had some like close to release games.
Yeah, they did the Super Nintendo port for Puzzle Bobble. Bust a Move in the North America, if you're familiar with that. It's like the Match 3 bubble shooter.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were working on that. Like it came out, you know, a year after. This game was just a complete afterthought. I mean, like I said, they were developing that and they were developing the Super Nintendo version of Bust a Move. So this game just got thrown to the wolves, kind of forgotten through history. And it's kind of, I remember like early collecting on for NES. This was like one of those games where it was like, oh, you know, I'm a big NES guy, but I've never actually played it or I've never actually seen it. Like this was for the longest time like a top 5 NES game. If you take stupid like variants and, you know, Nintendo World Carts out of this thing, this is like one of the holy grail NES games where people still have it on like this revered pedestal of like, it's still elusive, man. Like right now, even talking about, there's only 8 on eBay. Like, you don't see this game very often. So I think it kind of has this aurora to it where it's known as a rare thing. You don't see it very often. it truly is one of the holy grails for the NES. That being said, let's just jump into Let's jump into this convoluted story.
Know you're into Bubble Bobble like pretty big, so you said you weren't an expert on the story. Thankfully, this one doesn't seem too confusing as far as the grand scheme of the adventures of these two. So,
Oh, you say that. Yeah, if you just put the game in and follow it, it's very simple to follow. However, you want to go off the manual or the back of the box for which story this game is.
are they different?
Well, the manual had all of the bosses messed up too.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. Dude, it's wild. Like I said, I'm pretty sure there was a miscommunication because in Japan, the game follows the back of the box. I'm pretty sure when they send it over here, they're like, fuck it, just translate it, and that's why nothing matches. But if you go off the game's manual, you play as Bub and Bob, but they're the same characters from the original Bubble Bobble. And if you go off the back of the box, you're playing as Chubby and Rubby, which apparently are descendants. And even though they're human, apparently they have the bubble dragon.
I'm gonna guess it's a translation
Yeah.
Wonder if it's
where
like
they just brought it over and was like, "That's what it says," and they would just print it.
And honestly, I'm sure it goes with like, fuck it, just release it anyway. Like, we don't care. We're throwing this shit to the wolves. Like, do people play Bubble Bobble for the lore?
did they think they were making the Game Boy version for NES because it's Bubble Bobble Jr. And they just translated that and
Who's
slapped
the
it on
characters in Bubble Bobble Jr.?
It's a good question.
Got to be Chub and whatever.
It's worth
the
Googling.
Descendants,
Hang on.
like Junior.
I
right?
mean, it is. Well, I guess without knowing, it could be likely that they just copied and pasted from
right.
boxer manual. Gonna break my brain with this episode.
Dude. All right, so here's the answer about Bubble Bobble Jr. Y'all ready for some Metal Gear fucking layered waffles here?
Do you climb ladders?
Waffles. Lasagna.
Okay, so the game stars Robbie, who must rescue villagers from his hometown from the Demon King Great Skull. So different
And
villain,
Game Boy.
different character.
Okay.
Is that his human name or his dragon name?
No, because he's Bob and Bub.
Okay.
So you're
So
Robbie.
is Bob and Bob their human name or dragon name?
It's both.
Okay. I didn't know
They
they
just
had
turned
different-
into bubble dragons, yeah.
Okay.
I think they
But
meant
there's Chubby
Rubby.
and Robbie?
I think they meant Rubby, because Rubby's who
Chubby
you are.
and
yeah.
Rubby?
I think you play as Rubby.
You play
It
as
says
Rubby?
Robbie. I think it's a typo.
No way.
That would make more sense.
What's the typo?
So, the Descendants, like in the Japanese version, is Rubby, and then
On the box
yeah,
or your notes?
in the box,
I would have believed the
Back of the
notes,
box,
but I
yeah.
would have.
back of the box.
At this point, it's completely believable. There's just typos in their boxes because, I mean, you saw the manual for this.
But yeah, apparently you play as just Rubby in Bubble Bobble Jr.
So
This
Bubble Bobble Jr. is Robbie. And then Bubble Bobble Part 2 on the back of the box also says Rubby.
I think the box says Rubby, because yeah.
So what's the manual say? Bub and Bob?
Anybody got
Yeah.
one hanging around? Let me
So
look.
Rob and Bob and Bubby and Rubby and Robbie.
Yep.
They're all the same guy.
You got it.
No, this is Rubby and oh my god!
they're
Now I'm
the
getting my head. Ow! They're descendants. Yeah,
Right.
Bub and Bob are the original. Bubble Bobble, get it?
It's a multiverse. It's
Dude,
fine.
it's fucking deep cuts. Like y'all weren't prepared.
It's
I
just an
wasn't-
arcade game. Why?
Yeah, seriously. Anyways, where we at the story? So, if you throw the card in and just watch it, which you know what, that's the one I'm going with. Okay, it's my brain just melted.
a fucking Reaper comes and steals your girl and turns you into a dragon. You have to go rescue her.
Yeah, so
That's it.
Basically,
Easy.
you're standing there. Yeah, there's not a lot to it.
Thankfully.
We'll just go with it's either Chubby or Rubby. That's what it says in Japan. But it's Judy. Okay, so that's your girlfriend from the first game. All right, when you play as Bub. Okay.
There's
So
only 3 characters, but I'm
this is
already
where it gets
confused.
more fucked up. Yeah, so the Skull Brothers, who were the villains in the original one, but by this time they're split into 3 pieces from the Super Skelemonster's soul, because at the end of Rainbow Islands they split into 3, and there was 3 of them in the intro. So,
The final boss was 3 in 1.
so it's definitely a
Yeah.
continuation of Rainbow Islands, Parasol Stars. Excuse me. Oh my god.
I mean, is it a continuation or is it just kind of like an alternate timeline thing? Like
That's
an
the thing.
alternate whatever.
Ready for some more fuckery?
No.
No, please spare me.
So in the North American version, a scene in the game's intro, it's Bub, clearly right. If you read the manual, it says that, because there's a 2-player mode in this game, apparently, that it's going off of the Descendants story, okay? So it says that it's a friend of both of them, even though clearly in the intro there's hearts and stuff above their heads, so they're clearly in love. Another interesting note here, and pretty much the last thing I talk about an arcade-style game story, is that this is the only game in the Bubble Bobble series that has one ending. The series is actually known for different endings based on your performance. This game only has one, and it's good.
If you can actually get to it.
Yeah.
Shit's hard. Spoiler.
Yeah. Let's get into the gameplay and the controls. For those that don't know, Bubble Bobble is an arcade-style game. The best way I can describe this is like Mario Brothers Arcade, where there's different levels and platforms you have to jump on. Not Super Mario, like I know everyone's thinking of that, but the arcade game, okay? The only difference is instead of like trying to smash them and jump on them, you're basically a bubble dragon, and you blow bubbles by pushing B, and when you get an enemy into a bubble, they float to the top of the map, and you have to pop them. The more enemies you get together in a chain, the more you score. The more bubbles you explode in general, the more you score. They will turn into pieces of fruit, or soda, or a burger, or some kind of edible after you eat them, or after you pop them, and then you can eat them to get points. And the more points you score, the more health you get.
I mean, you could think of it as like a non-scrolling, like Donkey Kong, where each stage is its own self-contained, like, area map, and then everything is on that one screen. You don't scroll left or right or up and down to do anything, and then once you clear that area, you drop down, kind of like a tower, to another stage.
Yeah, it's an arcade game in its purest form. That's very true. But yeah, there's basically 10 stages that are in this self-contained world, and the backgrounds will change, and the layouts will change every 10 stages, but every 1-to-1 stage, you'll get a different layout or a different board, if you will, if you're old school like me.
What is the actual genre listed for this? Because saying it's an arcade game is so vague.
Yeah.
It's like an arcade platformer-ish.
There's, like, beat-em-up arcade games, racing arcade games.
The only reason why I say it like that, because, like, it's score-based. It's, it's not...
I get why you're saying
yeah,
it.
It's
just tough to describe. It's like an arcade platformer action game.
It just says platform.
Do you think your main thing is you're hacking enemies, you're jumping, you're navigating from traps, trying to hit enemies.
Right.
So I'd say a platformer is probably the most apt.
Yeah, if you guys have any sort of familiarity with the first Bubble Bobble, it's like that, but it's way more advanced. Like, the first one's pretty archaic on the NES. Like, you might have a long line, then a thin line, then a long line. This one's got some varied shapes and designs as far as the levels are concerned. There's also new additions to this game. They did enough to make it kind of feel like a sequel. So every 10 stages, you get a boss stage. That was in the first game also, but the bosses are a lot more varied, a lot different in this. Also, every 20 stages, you get a bonus round, which is new to the series also. You either play volleyball or you play basketball.
I was not prepared for those.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's a thing in this, but...
You play like a robot.
Yeah, it's a very specific character.
There's a third bonus game.
Really?
I can't remember what it is. But there's 3 different ones.
I thought it was...
volleyball, basketball, and one other thing.
I remember volleyball.
Spoiler, we didn't make it that far.
There is one more, though.
Yeah, basically it makes you play a sport against... he looks like a pop cap with, like, noodle arms and noodle legs with white gloves. Like, I don't know what he is.
He looks like a low-res Pokemon.
Yeah, there's some lore they didn't fill in there, where it's like you just get space jammed and you have to play a sport competition after trying to save your girlfriend in the Cave of Monsters. I don't know.
You said it's every 20 stages?
Yeah.
That would make sense. So it's like 20, 40, 60 is the 3, and then 80 is the final.
Yep. So yeah, there are 20 levels less than the original game. I don't think that's a detriment to it. I feel like this is... especially because it's kind of tough, and the bosses are more varied. Like, in the original game, it was literally one giant boss on the screen, and you just blew bubbles on him until he died. This one had, I think, our favorite boss that we encountered was the Xenomorph on the motorcycle. I don't remember his name because the manual was completely wrong. But we were cracking the hell up with that. It's basically like a big S pattern on the screen, and he comes at you from the left and the right, and you've got to shoot lightning bubbles at him from the left or the right side of the screen. Admittedly, he beat my fucking ass, and I was so shitty at first. But then we watched a video how to do it, and I was like, man, I'm pretty stupid. That we should have thought about that.
I just don't think you're
Because
expecting.
it's like there's like an item, like a power up. Looks like a little, like a vial or like a little science test tube with a lightning bolt on it. And you have to pick up the lightning bolt to turn your bubbles into lightning bolt attacks. So you can't damage them with normal bubbles. So you have to like pick that up, go against a wall or something. Like you have to blow the bubble and then pop it, and then that's what creates the lightning bolt attack. And that's the only thing that can damage this boss.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not just bubble attacks.
Right,
Like it's this
yeah.
bubble, and then you have to do other things with the bubbles to actually do any damage.
Yeah, and that's another thing they actually added to this game. There was special bubbles in the first game, and honestly, I don't remember which ones. I know the lightning one was one of them, but they added a wide variety of special bubbles in this game. What was the one that was like in the very early stages where it was green and it slid you down like a shoots and ladder style?
Yeah, if you got caught in it, it like uncontrollably sent you on a path. But if you
Like
hit
a slipstream.
yeah, if you hit an enemy with it, it would knock them out. So it's kind of cool. But if you like were falling towards a trap, it would hit you in the trap too. So you had to kind of balance out.
So the new special bubbles that they added were the wind bubble, which was like the tornado, which for some stages was a necessity to climb because there would be guys trapped that wouldn't move, and you had to hit them just right with the wind. And then the snow bubble, which we didn't make it that far. But the star bubble from Parasol Stars is also in here. There's new enemies that require multiple shots. They added just enough in the gameplay of this to make it feel like a sequel. It's sometimes I feel like it's difficult to do with arcade games because a lot of times it's like, oh, better graphics, better sound, but the same shit you know and love. And for have such a simplistic game, I feel like they did a good job just adding just enough. Nate, I know you're pretty familiar with the first game. Do you think that's a valid statement?
Yeah, super. I think arcade games, as far as making a good arcade game, you want it to stay simple but fun. And I think Bubble Bobble has always been a great example of that. And if as far as you're doing a sequel, it's a tricky balance. You want it to feel like the first game, but you want it to feel new enough to invest your time and money into. And I think they did a really good job with this one. It's definitely harder. That is one thing I will say. I was not expecting the difficulty spike. Like Brian and I have been through not all the Bubble Bobble games by any means, clearly, but like a good amount. We've played them, grew up on them, played them as adults, and I was not expecting to get my ass kicked like this. So I know it's an arcade game. It's designed to steal your money, but this was for the NES, so I don't really know why they went that route.
Right. Yeah, there's no arcade port of it, so they didn't have to make it so crazy.
I know there's like NES hard or whatever, but like this is pretty difficult game, and like Brian, you're above average Bubble Bobble player, I feel like, and even you struggle with it at times. But it does. It's part of it's because it does play so different. Like we were not expecting a xenomorph on a motorcycle to attack us out of nowhere, and the bosses are a lot different on this one. But yeah, they did a great job overall of updating it, making it feel fresh, but still feeling like I still knew I was playing Bubble Bobble as soon as I picked up the controller. I knew what to do.
With that being said, one of the biggest omissions in this game, and I think what made the first game such a popular NES game, was the lack of two-player. One, it makes it more hard when you don't have a friend to communicate and talk with when there's just, a big scary xenomorph on a motorcycle chasing you. But two, that kind of saved your ass in the original game, especially in the late stages, like 80 up. If you didn't have a buddy, it's almost like having an extra life, The reason why they say they didn't add two players simultaneous, because there is two-player, but it plays like the original Mario Brothers on NES, where Mario goes first, and then after Mario dies, Luigi goes. So you can play two-player on this, but you're literally taking turns instead of playing together. And that co-op experience is what made the first game so great. And quite frankly, it made it beatable. I beat it with Sherry. I have a really, really fond memory of playing early on in our relationship, playing the first Bubble Bobble with her. And she had no idea what the hell it was. Like, she's not into the old school games. And she was like, that was a lot of fun. Like, we just played it together, back to, one setting, 4 hours. This, no, man, like, this, it would be such a chore to sit there and play two-player. Like, we didn't even try it. I think we did.
No, we did. We launched
You
it
need a
once.
second controller still. You can't just pass the same controller. It's definitely a knock. It's missed, and it does add to the difficulty of this game. Barry, I know you don't have any experience with the original Bubble Bobble, so do you feel like that would, I mean, obviously I think you think it would help, but do you feel like it was like a glowing omission or was a detriment to the game at all?
What, not having two-player?
Yeah.
I don't have the experience of knowing what two-player is like in this game, so I don't really have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
The game is hard.
It is hard.
It is hard, and in my opinion, a lot of games in this era are like that. So that just seemed normal to me. So I don't know. I don't know. I can't give you a good answer for that one.
Well, I feel like there's certain maps, if you had a second guy going at the same time, you'd attack it completely different than you have to when you're by yourself. And like the first level we had trouble with was like level 6, I believe it was. It was very early on. We were like, oh, this is challenging. And if there was 2 of us going at once, like you would have scaled the left side of the map, I would have scaled the right. We'd have been able to call out when the flames trade instead of trying to watch both on the screen and watch your own guy. Like there's things that simultaneous co-op would have been.
It's interesting because the gameplay doesn't change whether you have one person or 2 people. So it's like, is giving it 2-player catering to an ease of access almost, or is the game trying to be more challenging on It's hard.
See,
that's a hard
point. Yeah.
That's a hard one to answer because like nothing changes.
Right.
So it doesn't. Does 2-player in the first game give you any other special abilities like?
No.
No, it
You
just
know,
plays
like
better.
Sonic when there's Tails, like Tails can fly, like he can do things Sonic can't. So it's just another bubble dragon.
Yep.
Okay.
I think that's the thing though. Like on the NES back then, there wasn't a lot of simultaneous co-op games. So if you were able to use that second controller with a friend, like it adds to the game, but it doesn't necessarily add any any different
interesting.
Think
mechanic.
of it like Contra, where it's like
Yeah.
great game, but like with a friend, it's one of the best games ever made.
It's a hard one to answer. Like on one hand, like are you playing this game by yourself because you want something actually challenging that tests your ability to memorize, to react quickly, to know where you need to stand and whatnot. Like I'm sure a lot of people like this game for that reason because everything that happens in the stages is pre-rendered. Everything happens in the same patterns. It's not like something does something random. You can stand in one spot and an enemy will move in the exact same pattern every single time. So it takes time to memorize like exactly where you need to stand, where you need to go here and there. Or are you looking to have fun with someone else? It's a difficult
Right.
one to answer on this, where
that's
it's
why I
like
wanted
if
to
you
ask
add a
you,
second
yeah.
player, are you going to take away from that skill-based difficulty that people enjoy about it at the same time?
Right.
It's a hard one.
And that's why I wanted to ask you because I know you don't have a lot of experience with the original game. And for me, I don't want to make it sound like I'm just totally shitting on this game, but like I do have the fondness of playing with my brother, playing with Sherry on the original game, and for them to take that away, like it's a big knock. It's something to consider with this game.
It may be different on the opposite, because like if they added 2-player to this game, I don't think it would take away the skill challenge from a single player because it's the exact same game. Like 2 players not adding anything, or the game's not making it to where it's like, hey, you can't play this without 2 people. Like inherently there are things that 2 people have to do at the same time in order to get it done. Like there are some people who play games that are made to be 2-player, but they'll take on the solo challenge because the game's not made to be solo. But this one doesn't feel like it's made to be solo or 2-player, so it kind of sucks that you don't get that option to enjoy it with somebody else, regardless of which way you want it to play, because it only caters to one person now.
Right.
Whereas the first game, it seemed like it catered to both.
Oh yeah.
So
Co-op was definitely one of the selling points on the first game. It's like you guys can play this at the same time.
right,
Now the way they combated that though, it's interesting you bring up the difficulty thing because Bubble Bobble Part 2 has a new health system. The first one was like, yeah, you get hit, you die, you have a buddy to save your ass as a second life or whatever, but you just throw a quarter in. This one, you have to collect hearts that are on the map, and they randomly pop up, but you can stack your hearts, right? So you can get hit multiple times in this, and later on, that's pretty vital because it gets pretty wild. But you can keep taking hits as long as how many hearts you have. So it's like, I think you can hold up to 5, which...
I feel like it was more than that.
Yeah, it might have been.
No.
I don't know. We got whooped on. I made it to level 30 for transparency, and then I was like, you know what? It's weird though, because like every time I would try this, I would get better and better and better. But like I was the one that was kind of like, all right, I'm gonna do this. Like I love Bubble Bobble. I want to take the lead on this, and I made it to 30, and I was like, you know what? I'm comfortable with getting.
Well, I mean, that was the first time you played it.
It's true.
So
Yeah, if I would have sat there and played it more, I think I probably could have got a little further. However, there were some levels. Whew. Goddamn, I missed that second bubble dragon. But yeah, the health was the way they tried to make it a little easier because they know there was an omission of that second player. And the reason why they gave, they said, hey, like the sprites are bigger, the animations are nicer, the slowdown would have been crazy. Which, yeah, you do notice if you do a bunch of bubbles, there is some slowdown. But I don't know if that's something that, if it would have been chugging, I guess it would have been like, all right, fuck this. But NES can get kind of chuggy and flashy anyways at a time. So
I don't know. Do you feel like if they limited the amount of bubbles you were allowed to have on screen, you could have
See?
2-player? Because
That's
like
the
in this
thing.
one, you could just blast bubbles infinitely.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, okay, we can have 2-player, but you can only blast 3 at a time. And if you blast a fourth one, the first one pops by itself and recycles.
yeah, my gut tells me there was probably ways around it. Like, that's a great idea, like limiting the bubbles because the sprites are what's causing the slowdown and the flickering, right? All right, limit
You
the
could put a lot of bubbles on that screen.
limit the fucking bubbles and you
Stab.
fix the
Yeah.
slowdown. The
I
only
don't know.
the only thing I could think of, because this game does add new mechanics as well. So if you hold down the bubble button B, your dragon fills up with air, and he has this like ability to fly, kind of like Smog Monster Godzilla. But he fills up with air and he flies to the top of the screen. And when you let go of the button, you shoot like 4 bubbles at once.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people's theories are they kind of have the 2 giant sprites, because the sprites are pretty big and they're heavily animated. We'll get to that in the graphics. But a lot of people are saying that's what would have caused the inability to have 2 players, because you have 2 dragons flying around and they're already shooting 8 bubbles by the time you let go of the B button, which
I don't know. Give me 2 dragons instead of fucking waterfalls.
is what I'm saying.
I don't know.
Don't animate the backgrounds. I feel like there's ways around it. I feel like
Or it's like if your inhalation attack only shoots out 4 bubbles, like that's the max amount of bubbles you can have, and
Or-
you can't shoot anymore until they're gone. I don't know.
Or maybe have only one player be allowed to inflate at a time. I feel like there's ways around it, and I feel like we were kind of shortcut on this, because that's the thing, man. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on this game, because I do enjoy it, but it is such a glowing omission to not have co-op in a freaking Bubble Bobble game. Like, it's a crime.
It's definitely a franchise staple that's clearly missing in this one. And to say, oh, there is 2-player, like, okay, man, chill out. There's not.
It's 2-player in the sense of one person dies, the other person gets a shot.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's the thing. It almost makes it more competitive, and like, this isn't supposed to be a competitive game. It's supposed to be a co-op game.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if like the second controller picked up from right where you died, to help finish the stage, but that's not the case.
Right. It's definitely my biggest sin in this game is the lack of 2-player co-op. It's a staple of the series. And like I said, maybe it is nostalgia for me. That's why I wanted to ask Barry's opinion. But I don't know, man. For me, it's like, ugh. And the fact that it costs so much and you're taking shit out. And yeah, you are adding new mechanics and everything. I think it plays great. I think it's a fun arcade game. But for the NES version, and this is an NES exclusive, when you're catering to that home market and you take away some of the home features, it's kind of like, I don't know, man. It's definitely a black eye, in my opinion. I just want to go with you first, because again, like, I'm biased, man. Like, Nate and I have sunk hours into the first game, but you've never really had any experience with it.
I don't play too much NES because I
Right.
don't. 8-bit is really hard for me to enjoy.
That's why I pick shit like this for you.
But it is probably the best 8-bit looking game I've seen.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how they did what they did with it, to be honest. There were some things in there like the sprites, especially the boss sprites, they just it looks really good.
They're huge, for
It looks
starters.
really good.
That's the first thing I noticed. Even your main
I'm trying to
character.
even like think of other games that I've seen before that I'm just like that's anywhere on par with this, and maybe it's because it was at the end of the Nintendo life cycle, so like they have more experience developing for the console, and it's not like, black box games or you got 3 pixels on that screen if
Right.
fucking best, but this one had so much more color than I'm used to. It had so much more detail with the sprites and the stages than I'm used to. I don't know. Like there's a part in one of the worlds where the background has like they're just bubbles or the clouds. Like the clouds looked phenomenal. The backgrounds and the environments looked so good that I was not expecting them to look that polished. It was an experience.
It's pretty jarring, man, especially playing the first game. Even, we'll just go like level.
I've seen Super Nintendo games look worse than that.
Yeah, it's
So-
crazy. Like, the number one thing that stuck out for me was like, holy shit, these sprites are big. Even your main character, like, that's a big sprite. And then the second you start walking, like, the animation.
It's so smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dude. It's like, what? Wait, hang on. It's not just like a little pixel foot moving forward. It's literally like a full thigh, like, moving. Like, they've got locomotion
He
behind
like
them.
waddles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even like the the animation where you hold B and you fill up with air and you fly, it's fucking hilarious. Like we were all cracking up every time we would do it, but it's almost like watching a cartoon. Like it's so smooth, and like NES games are not supposed to look like this.
Yeah, I think they did a great job with the look of the game because it looks like an arcade game. It does not look like it's on an NES. Honestly, it's like Barry said, it's colorful. I think I popped really hard when the dude started inflating. The animation was awesome, his little face turning, but you could see like their expressions, their joints and stuff move. It's crazy for. And it'd be one thing if it's like, okay, they put all the time in just the main character, but like even the enemies have like little personalities and stuff. When they get hit, they'd wince, and it wasn't like one or two eyes moving. It was like a whole body movement, and it's pretty wild on an NES. I did not expect that when you picked this game, so hats off to them. It's funny because it's like we say this game got thrown to the wolves, but then here we are with like outstanding graphics that have no reason being this good in a game barely anyone got to play.
Yeah, I don't think it's a crazy statement to say this is the best looking NES game I've ever seen.
Was it like so far out that NES was just that easy to develop for that they could really take their time and try to make this look pretty?
Well, the thing is with the last release Taito games, like they were known as hardware pushers, and it might be because they've been developing for it. But like you think of this, you think of Panic Restaurant, like again another looker on the NES.
For sure.
And honestly, I think it might be one of the reasons why the game's expensive. I don't think it's the main reason, but I mean, it's like literally my jaw hit the floor the first time I saw this. Because before this, the only time I ever played this is I threw it in my Nintendo. I'm like, all right, it works, and I took it out and threw it back in its protector. Like, but to see this thing in motion, it was like jaw dropping, especially on the Retron and like HDMI. It's beautiful. And then we ended up hooking the Nintendo up and playing it natively, and it was like, this is crazy how ridiculous this looks. But even their scrolling animations, like the NES isn't supposed to be able to scroll like that. And the waterfall moving with the background.
The vertical scrolling was really cool in the waterfalls, yeah.
It's crazy. And then, like you said, the color palette, like there's so many colors on the screen at once. Like, it's definitely, I don't think it's crazy to say it's the best looking NES game I've ever played. Like, hands down, no questions asked. From the sprite work, they're just so big. It's like, do you remember like first time you played a Genesis back in the day compared to Nintendo, and you're like Super Nintendo, you're like, oh, these sprites are freaking huge. Like that was the first thing you noticed on Genesis and Super Nintendo era games where the sprites were big. This is an NES game with sprites, as big as your hand you holding up to the screen. The bosses were huge. And yeah, it's got your NES flicker and your slowdown like we talked about previously, but I don't think it was detrimental to the game at all.
No, unless you were sitting there literally just we tried to make it laggy with the bubbles a couple of times just by like spamming bubbles, but obviously it's like now you're not even trying to play it at that point. You're just trying to see how fast you can push the bubble button.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's complaining about flicker and slowdown on this one, like you're just nitpicking because like it runs really good. The screen had no problems with flicker or feeling like a sprite wasn't where it was supposed to be, like, or I didn't land where I was supposed to be, or I got fucked over by a pixel.
Yeah, the hit detection was really good too.
So if someone's complaining about performance on this, they're just nitpicking, to be honest, because it performed really well graphically.
Yeah, that's the thing, pushing the limits too. Like, I remember we even pulled the card out. I'm like, bro, this card's hot. Like, it was definitely a console pusher. But I think the best way to describe this, especially if you're familiar with the first game, just pull up a screenshot. Like, pulling up a screenshot of the first game.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
It's so primitive compared to this. Like, not even just the sprites, but like the level layout, the lack of color. I mean, like, yeah, it's got some decent color, but
there's no good color cohesion.
Yeah,
it's not thoughtful.
Detail. It's literally just like red.
It looks like
red.
Donkey Kong, the first one.
Yeah, it's
and then this looks like a full-on arcade game.
Yeah, it's and then the anime, you see it in motion, you're just like, oh my god. Because I remember one of the cool things in the first game is like the little tail nub, like it'll wag, and it's like, oh, that's a cute little touch. But just like these sprites blink and the waddle, and when you see him fill up with air, you can literally see his stomach get bigger. Like the animations are just so goddamn impressive on this. It's hard to believe it's an NES game.
I think graphics were definitely like one of the strongest, if not the strongest feature in this game.
Yeah, I was going to say, the game's a lot of fun, and I feel like it does enough to, like, warrant a sequel. Graphics support that statement also. Like, this is head and shoulders above the first game graphically. Definitely one of the major selling points for this game. So let's jump into the sound. My opinion, the music is vastly improved, especially because the first game was literally one song that played all 100 stages. And yeah, I think that first song is iconic.
Absolutely.
It didn't have a choice to be because literally you had to hear it for 100 stages. So the fact that there is varied music every 10 stages, it's pretty cool. I don't think it's like an absolute banger of a soundtrack. I think it's solid. I think it's serviceable.
Did you sit and listen to the soundtrack by itself?
I didn't.
Okay.
So I know your opinion was a lot different.
You need to do it because these songs are really good.
Yeah, they're boss, bro.
They're really good songs.
I also want to, for clarity, I'm not a huge like chiptune music guy. So my opinion might not be the best on this, but I mean, I think
How
it's
did you feel
serviceable.
about Chrono Trigger's music?
Chrono Trigger is fucking amazing. What are you
Hey,
talking about?
it's chiptune music still.
I hear you.
Like
Chrono Trigger's a little
you
different.
gotta give some of these older games a shot because like there are some that are really really good. Like they have so many layers that you're not paying attention to them when you're playing the games.
You're too focused, especially on a difficult
Right.
game when you're like,
Please. Yeah, I was so focused on this, I was like sweating.
Right. So half the time, like you don't remember the music because you're so focused on something else. But like the music in this game was actually really good. There wasn't a lot of tracks. It wasn't like 50 fucking songs.
Yeah, but it's like an NES cart.
But
Yeah.
they had some really good tracks. There was one specifically, and maybe you'll agree with me. But the first world, the first 10 stages, that song like sounded like the field music in Phantasy Star, like
Ooh, yeah.
so close.
wow, I didn't even realize that till you said it, but you're totally right.
And it was so, I was like, wow, this is really good. This is NES. And it was making me think of Master System and what they did musically for Phantasy Star. And I'm like, this is, what else is on here? So like I was looking it up. I had to add some notes on here, but the composer, his name is Kenichi Kamoi. I think that's his name. But he was inspired by an Italian composer known for Godfather Part 2 called Nina Rota. And he studied under a Japanese composer who is really well known for ambient music in Japan. His name's Hiroshi Yoshimura. And what he would do is utilize nature sounds in his harmonic music. And so it was very ambient. It was soft. It was kind of really like almost like a mood setting based on like the noises you would hear. And that's really reflected specifically on World 3. Is that what I put?
Yeah.
So World 3 introduces the waterfalls and the bubbles. And so the music that plays that whole time makes me think of like falling stars or raindrops. And it really like is soft and it's nice. And it's like, it makes you feel good. Like if you go to a waterfall, you're like, man, this waterfall is fucking sick. Like nobody's ever gone to a waterfall and was like, meh. It's a waterfall.
Right.
So it made you feel relaxed the whole time. Like it really reflected the environment that was in it. And it was a specific choice that he made. So
That's cool.
and I was looking up too that
Kind of sucks I missed that.
he didn't, when he would write music, he'd physically write them on sheets of paper and he'd give them to another guy to put into his sound converter. So, and that guy, what is his name? I have it written down. Kiyoshi Katsatsu. He was actually close friends, so he would work with him a lot. But that guy created his own sound drive system, and then he would give the physical sheet music to this guy, and he would convert his music over into your 8-bit chip tune.
Holy shit.
So he didn't actually like program anything, but he wrote everything by hand, and then had someone convert it to a program.
See, again, I hear shit like that, and I'm like, why did you send this game to the wolves, man? Why did you send this game to die? 'Cause,
so it's like
that's a labor of love, man.
It's like the music in this game isn't some dude sitting at a board going beep boop beep boop beep boop. Like he composed it like traditionally,
Dude, that's awesome.
and they converted it over, and it's really reflected when you listen to the songs, like how many layers there are that you wouldn't have really gotten while you're trying to sweat a fucking xenomorph boss. So
That's my problem. I was just screaming too much.
there's a lot more credit in this game to the music than like you would first anticipate, especially with knowing a lot more about the composer and like what he was going for in terms of like what we got as a result. And I think it was done really well. What his vision was reflected in the game very well.
Just especially chiptune music. If you can paint a mood setting or like a picture with chiptune music, you're doing something special. And I think especially like I went and had to watch it because we couldn't get that far. But like I watched a full playthrough of this game, and the first time you get those bubbles in that waterfall and that song hits, and you're like, "Damn, this is beautiful!" And this is on an NES. It is kind of like overwhelming. It's like great job to make you convey anything, especially on an NES. Like you're really working double time on that. So
I kind of did the opposite. Like we kind of went through and watched it all, but we were more focused on the gameplay and like what
Right.
the later levels looked like or whatever. So I ended up going to a playlist and listening to all of the tracks, and there was the one that I was like, wow, this one's really good. Where is this in the game? So I went, it was titled World 3, and I went to World 3, and it was the waterfall one. I'm like, this is exactly what I was thinking it would be. So
when you can do that, that's crazy.
Right. I did it on the opposite, where I'm like, this is what it makes me think of. I'm curious what it actually looks like or where it is in the game. And it was on pretty accurate.
That's awesome, man.
I'm not going to get on a chiptune rant too much, but there's that you could easily bop and boop, but then there's so much innovation with it too, where you had to work around the limitations of it, which is like where I really get excited when you dive into a soundtrack you didn't know. Then you figure out how they went about making it with the limitations. It's fucking awesome. Like, so much talent.
Bro, to me that just adds, like, I didn't know any of this, and then when you added this to the notes, I was like, holy shit, like, I feel like a fucking ape brain over here just being like, jump and blow bubble, like, it make bubble sound. Like, this is art, man. When someone's actually sitting there converting, to a machine that they made, like, how fucking cool is that?
Oh, Nate touched on it too. It is really hard for 8-bit.
Yeah.
It's really hard to, like, find information about a lot of this old stuff. I had kind of had to dig for it, and I know people who put this information on the website had to dig for that information too. So a lot of it's really hard to find immediately, and that's kind of everything in that era, especially NES or everything prior or PC, anything made for like any kind of PC Engine type thing. It's so hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
So
it's just in general, like, there's so many less people working on these games back then too, and it's like they're just doing their job, and they don't really keep a history. Like, there's no behind the scenes DVD for making a Bubble Bobble Part 2. You know what I mean? So, like, the information's way harder. You might get lucky and get like a magazine review to translate from Japanese. You might get an interview of someone who's still alive and not in the industry anymore. Like, finding information is got to be so hard for stuff like this.
Right, and even in the video games too, like older stuff, especially if they started their careers in games and really never went anywhere past that, like, they get lost in the shuffle so easily. Like, the guy who did this soundtrack is now more so known for films and shows and whatnot, like not video game music. I think he stopped doing video game music in early 2000s. He's got a side company that helps with some of it too, but it's not like he composes for video games anymore. He's known for film. So then you've got those people who never branched outside of games into film or anything else like that, and they're not known outside of the industry, and then fell off.
Or people who never even used their real names, you have no idea who they are.
True, yeah.
It's pretty wild. Who would have thought? But again, shit like that's why preservation's important. Like, I know I'm not in the minority here, where it's like, this is the kind of stuff, like, video games are art, and that's why it's important to learn about this and preserve this kind of thing.
I think definitely the sound and graphic design of this game are leaps and bounds better than any business they should be, and they did a great job with it, and I want to, like, really emphasize that.
Yeah, comparatively, again, I've said this for almost every category, truly feels like a sequel. It's definitely a huge jump over one repetitive, iconic song, but it's literally, it had no choice to be iconic.
It's iconic because it's, like, also more available. Like, no one really got to play this. I feel like if people heard this soundtrack, they'd be pretty impressed by it.
Yeah. Even the sound, like the bubbles, the sounds are serviceable, and the dragons and the enemies make their annoying sounds or whatever, arcade style sounds. I don't want to say annoying, but it's serviceable. And to learn all about the soundtrack, pretty mind blowing, honestly. Alright, so let's talk about the hot button issue, particularly for this game. Price and collectability. I just want
Kidneys.
I just want to start off with a hot damn, because, again, this is an NES grail. This is one of those games that, like, even before video game collecting got to what it is today, like, this was one of those, holy grail items. Like, that term gets thrown around so much now. This game literally is, like, an NES, mega title. Even, like, back then when people were, going to Funkoland and buying NES games for 50 cents and quarters and stuff, this game was, like, $12 back then, like, pretty wild. If you really want to, hit yourself in the head with a book, or, shoot yourself in the foot, go back and look at old forum posts and old YouTube videos from about 10 years ago. And
No, 20.
yeah.
10, 20 is even worse.
Oh, dude, the funniest one I saw. Which, no, we were
Not
here looking at them.
2010s. We're talking
Yeah,
mid 2000s.
Yeah. The funniest one I saw was this guy was like, I was watching a YouTube video and this guy was like, "Can you believe people are paying $250 for this game complete on eBay?" That was only 10 years ago.
I think I saw one when I was, maybe, was it this game I was looking at reviews for? I saw one where the guy was like, if you find this in the clearance bin for $2 in the bargain bin, it's probably worth it. And I'm like, what? Huh?
It's so funny because it's this game.
Could you imagine finding Bubble Bobble Part 2 in a bargain bin?
Can you imagine finding an NES game in a bargain bin anymore? Like, even the sports games are like
That's true.
$5.
It's so crazy though, because like
It's a bargain now.
Yeah.
even like the NES collectors back then, like they knew this game was a unicorn. Like not a lot exist, and I think it's so interesting because it's such a beloved franchise specifically for the NES, where a lot of people were like, "Wait, they made a 2? I didn't know they made a 2 for this game." Like it's truly a rare game. It's low print. Sales figures as far as what it sold back then are tough to find. But it's a late release Taito game. You already get mega clout with that. I know it's low print. I know it's sold low. It's in the top 10 of NES games as far as rarity, even now. I mean, consistently, it used to be 5, but we've learned so much more about variants and 5 screws and hang tabs and all that bullshit. Where like back then when people were just grabbing carts, like this was a top 5 game. And honestly, as far as retail releases, it's not far from there. It's probably not past number 7.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a shipping crate full of these sealed anywhere.
No. Like this is a truly rare low print game.
They probably put the bare minimum out to get it published.
I'll put it to you like this right now. There's 8 of them on eBay. Total. 8 total. It's loose cart, that's complete. 8 total. And maybe 7 because one of them doesn't have a picture of the board. That's another thing with this game. If y'all are buying this game, make sure you get a look at that board. It is heavily reproduced because people know about it and they try to pass it off as a legitimate cart. Like this is a heavily faked game. So make sure if you do buy one or if you are going to buy one, crack that board and look at that board and make sure it looks correct. There's plenty of reference pictures on the internet. But as long as everything looks legit, yeah, definitely double check before you buy it.
I do want to clarify the North American release of this was in August, not March.
Oh, shit.
So there was about a 6-month difference between Japan and North America.
Interesting.
I was trying to find any kind of sold numbers of any region, and I can't find anything.
Yeah, it's not a lot of debt.
I was looking for like definite sales figures, but it's hard. Like I said, back then they sent this thing to die. I think they knew it was gonna do.
Yeah, I can't find anything, and for the game to be released in both regions in the same year for that old, it's pretty rare too. So it feels like it got pushed out pretty quickly. It doesn't feel like the game got worked on quickly, but it feels like it got pushed out fast.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It's I don't know how to explain it.
No, I get what you're saying. It's a quality game. It got sent to die. I don't understand. Like, I think this would have done great on the Super Nintendo. I think it would have been a different conversation than we're having now, like talking about this unicorn ghost of a game. I mean, that's the thing. Like, yeah, people know about it now. The collecting market's completely different. And the fact that this game still demands, this price and there's still only 8 of them on eBay, it's kind of crazy. But let's go into the pricing for this. Loose cart, you're looking at anywhere from $470 to $500. The last one sold on eBay was $474, and then one last month sold for $500. So it kind of fluctuates and jumps up and down. Complete in box, you're looking around $1,200 was the last complete sale. There's only 2 at the box on eBay right now. One person's asking $1,300. One person's asking $3,000.
That's a little high.
But yeah, just the box is going anywhere from $600 to $1,000, and the manual is going for $200 to $300. I hardly ever see the box in the manual. If you do find this, it's probably just going to be the cart. There's actually one out there on eBay right now with the cart and the manual, but the manual's got a sticker on it for $5.
As far as this year goes, complete, we've had sold of 1,100, 900, and 1,200.
Jesus.
But last year it was all over the place with Complete, so I'd be curious to see, because once the listings go away, you can't view them after a certain amount of time.
That sucks.
And price charting will document that they happened and existed and try to hyperlink it, but eBay will take the hyperlinks away. So I'd be curious on what the condition is on some of these. I see one for $2,000, $1,649, then there's one for $550 that says complete with manual and sleeve.
Steal.
So that's not complete cart, manual, and sleeve for the cart. So that one is
it's just a cart with a manual.
$550 with a manual though is
cheap as
pretty
fuck,
cheap.
though.
Yeah.
That was 2022. Manual listings, I'm seeing 200, 400, 220, 280.
Yeah, I've seen close to 300 for manuals.
Just box 600, 600. Box only 1,000. Box only 1,000.
Those gotta
so
be
wild.
600. They gotta be nice.
Yeah. That's another thing to bring up too with this game. I know the grading bullshit, which we've talked about a little bit on this podcast. There was a graded copy that sold for $20,000, but
The last factory sealed sold in 2014 for $5,300.
Back then.
yeah,
There's
that's
a
crazy.
there's a private sale on here for 2011 for 15 grand.
That's probably that graded one. If I had to
Back then?
guess.
Maybe it says new.
Yeah,
graded.
private sale.
They have
Imagine
their own,
that. Like he
so
sold it to him fucking self.
in February. A WATA 8.5 sold for 9,600. 2022 a WATA 8.5 sold for 12,000. So it looks like WATA is going down.
A little
Wow.
bit.
Huh. Who would have guessed that?
What's that? A 6-month difference between the same fucking grade and the same grading company?
Oh,
12,000 to 9,600.
Barry, but that's what investments do. That they've got to dip before they rise again, much like the Phoenix.
Oh, much like the Phoenix.
Don't even get me started, bro. But yeah,
I don't know. Bubble Bobble to me reads as like there is kind of a baseline, but it really comes down to how much you're willing to pay.
We'll kind of get into it, go into conversation, but with NES games specifically, I don't think anybody's starting to go after a full NES library with Bubble Bobble. Like, just generally one of the last games they need for it. So it's like sometimes people will overpay to get that last couple fucking games they need, especially NES guys, because like I think we're past the peak in NES collecting, but there's still people that are like, you're missing your heavy hitters, and like if it's like the last one you need, you get a nice bonus. Fuck yeah, I'll overspend and grab Bubble Bobble Part 2.
Yeah. It's like I said, it still has this mystique to it where it is like one of the most desired NES games. And that's the thing. Most, complete set collectors, they're not going to get the NWC carts. They're not going to get the Nintendo Challenge carts. Like, this is in that top tier of retail release grail games. And like you're saying, I think if, there's one out there on a box, like, I don't think someone's going to buy that $3,000 one, but someone's going to pull the trigger on that $1,600 one eventually. Like, these do sell. Like, when I see them out there, they might sit for a bit, they eventually sell. Like, this is a desired game that isn't for everyone. Like I said, it's, well, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just go right into it if we think it's worth it. My gut tells me if you're buying this to play, and then remember, this is the only way you can play this game, is through the NES cart. $500 roughly for a cart is a lot of goddamn money. That being said, I think this is a really fun game. I think it's a showcase for your NES of what it can do. I think it truly is rare is another thing. Like, that word gets thrown around so much, but this really is a rare gem of a game. Just playing it though, man, like, for me as a fan of the series, it takes a lot away to not have that co-op ability. Like, that's such a huge black eye for me, man. And then also when I was thinking about it, put it like this. I bought my Neo Geo 4 slot with Bubble Bobble Arcade and 3 other games for $500. You could buy a fucking Neo Geo arcade machine with the game for the price of just a cartridge for this game. And yeah, it's not the same game. I know they add some mechanics and stuff, but like, boy, wouldn't it be fun to play an arcade with like your buddy? You know what I mean? So as far as playing it, I don't know if it's worth it, man, honestly. But then looking at the way this game fluctuates, and here's the thing with the NES. The NES is always going to be like the video game console. It might not be your jam, but like your parents' parents and your parents yourselves, when you slowly turn into your parents, you refer to every video game console as a Nintendo. Like, this is the video game system, and this is one of the games for that console. It's kind of like the 50 Cent argument where it's like that might be the, biggest 360 game for that console. This is always going to be in that top 10 for the video game console. And then seeing the prices, man, like it's gone up. Like people freaking out spending $250 10 years ago. And now it's what, $1,200, $1,600. Like, I don't think it's a horrible investment, quite frankly. Yeah, it's going to take some time to return if you're buying it for investing purposes, which I don't do. But if that's your thing, I think there's worse options to have. So honestly, I'm kind of conflicted on like if it's worth it or not. What do you guys think?
You can go first.
So yeah, as far as if is this gameplay worth $500? Like, no, I think that's pretty obvious. Like, I like the arcade games, but there's so many better games you can get for cheaper. That being said, it's a pure collectible. I do think this is worth it. I think I have a hard time seeing this one go down too much. I think you look at Atari 2600 collecting when its boom happened. There was stuff that got expensive, but not this expensive. NES has staying power. This is a popular franchise. I know it's not as well known licensing wise as like we keep talking about Final Fantasy episode, like a Final Fantasy or whatever, but like this is a popular franchise that people know, especially internationally. This is a very big franchise. I think this has a little crossover with like the arcade community. I think you throw this on yourself, everyone's going to go, holy shit, it's Bubble Bobble Part 2. I think it's always going to be that way. I think NES is a big enough name where it has staying power. I don't see it dropping too much. I think when you go cart complete, I think it's, if you have the financial ability to pull the trigger and you're looking at it as a pure collectible, go for it. As much as I love Bubble Bobble, I don't think I'm ever buying this game for $500. I'm gonna throw it out there. I would have to look into this game to get it myself, but
Yeah, I feel you there.
yeah.
Yeah, really quick, let's talk about how I got mine. So, guy I know ended up buying it for $300. And, hey, you know what? Actually, I talk a lot of shit about graded games, but I got to thank them for my purchase and acquisition of Bubble Bobble II. Because this guy watched a video about grading games, and I had like a tub of just sealed bullshit. Like, I'm talking like Country Wii Dance, Best Buy exclusive, a couple like PS3 games, couple 360 games.
How many years ago was this?
7-ish?
You got this game 7 years ago?
Something like that. 5, 6,
That
7.
seems a little long.
Yeah, my timelines,
little
look,
long.
COVID time, so like,
I would say so you got this in 2018.
maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
That's probably, yeah.
Right.
probably 4 or
Okay.
5.
Yeah, because it
It was
was
about a year or
right.
two before I opened the store.
It was right in that little beginnings of the grading market.
It was
boom.
about a year or two before I opened the store.
Okay.
So, but yeah, basically he watched a video about how grading games is going to take off, and I traded him a tub of like, bullshit games for this because he was going to send them in to get graded.
I saw the games. They are shit.
Yeah,
Like,
literally the best
can
game in there was
confirm.
probably Devil May Cry 2 on PS2 sealed, which, what the fuck does that go for?
But it wasn't even like the normal release one. It was the one that was in the triple pack.
Yeah, it's a double pack one, you're right.
Yeah, so
I'm just curious now. That's the thing. I think I came out ahead. I spent about $60 total on that tub of games. So, I'm pretty grateful to get. This is a series I wanted to get every game for, and this is one I didn't think I was going to get. So I'm pretty humbled to even have this. I'm glad I have it. Pulling that trigger would be very. Ooh.
So you traded a couple games of Wii shovelware.
Well, they were Best Buy
Sealed.
exclusives, all right? Wii Country Dance or whatever the fuck
Wii
it is.
Country
Trigger
Dance
2, excuse me.
for Bubble Bobble Part 2.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And is anybody in the audience going to tell me they would not make that same trade?
This is one of those
Only
stories.
one
that,
guy.
Like, legitimately, it's true, but you
The
post
guy
it on
who
Reddit.
fucked up
you're
and
like,
did it.
Bullshit. This is one of those stories you post on Reddit. Everyone's like, "This motherfucker's lying." Like, no, this is exactly how
No,
I got it.
I know it wasn't that long ago because I do remember this happening.
Yeah.
I do remember this happening. And I was literally also like, why in the fuck would you take that offer? But okay, dude.
I'm glad you got this game, Brian. 'Cause
Yeah,
I
me
know it
too.
means something to you.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a huge fan of the series, and like this, back then, honestly, I really was into NES collecting. That was like a big checking point of mine. Is like, oh, I want all these NES games that I really, really want, and this is one I never thought I'd get, and I have it. I'm pretty grateful to have it the way I got it. Like, hell yeah, it's worth it if you can do that. Like, straight up, no questions asked.
Do you know what's funny is like you didn't even have to twist his arm. Like he basically begged
Yeah.
at this like
It was his idea.
It was his idea. He was like, dude, I want all of those. You can take this. I'm like, yeah, throw away the piece of trash. Bubble bobble.
The
That's
extra
fine.
hilarious part is you get to pick out of that tub ones you wanted to keep, and you end up keeping a decent amount of them too.
Oh, Devil May Cry 2 sealed goes for about $60, by the way.
Hell yeah, $60.
The all-time classic Devil May Cry 2.
That's honestly
WADA 9.0
I don't know, the country-
We're totally doing a
8999999.
disservice. We didn't look up all these games. WADA 9.8s though.
that's true. You know, $20,000.
I don't think you're ahead,
Paying
bro.
for those?
I don't think
Who
you're
the
ahead.
fuck is paying for a WADA graded country time lemonade
It's a Best Buy exclusive.
dance game?
It's a Best Buy exclusive.
The owners at WADA. That's it. The WADA just buys and trades amongst themselves.
Anyways.
His name.
But yeah, anyway, so yeah, if you get it like that, yeah, man, I think it's worth it. My humble opinion, since I do have one also, I feel like it's a little skewed. I don't think it's a horrible investment. It keeps going up. I think you have to wait a while for it to climb, but I don't think this is one of those games that's going to just magically tank one day. But playing it, I think it's a great game. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a man, is it $500 worth of fun? You can buy a damn arcade machine for that. So I'm honestly torn.
I think you absolutely have to look at this one as a collectible purely, because like
Yeah.
no one's gonna say, yeah, this is a $500. This is one of the best games of all time. No one's gonna say that. At this table, could you honestly say your favorite game of all time is worth $500 fucking dollars? Like, if I could relive the experience of me playing my
It's
favorite,
pretty close.
yeah, I could probably. You can make an argument for probably about 2 or 3 games. You're like, I'd spend $500 to relive that experience again, but not a lot. You know what I'm saying? This is definitely not gonna be anyone's like, yes, greatest platformer arcade game I've ever played. It's not. There's cheaper options that are very comparable. This one has to be pretty much viewed as like a pure collecting sense.
It's tough, man. Barry, what do you think?
I think this game is not as rare as people think it is.
Really? Do you think the mystique
Okay.
adds to that?
There's not a mystique to it is the problem. So like
Not so much anymore, but this is before
let's
the
compare
internet,
this
you know.
game to a game that is similar in cost. I'm going to bring up Rise of the Robots for Game Gear. How many of those have you ever seen sold?
A lot. Years.
Yeah. In the last year, there's been 2 sold. One of them was one I sold. Within this year, we've had 10 copies of Bubble Bobble Part 2 sell. Within this year alone. Same price range. The Bubble Bobble Part 2 is a mixture of the NES being an extremely popular console, Bubble Bobble itself being a very popular property within a certain age group of people.
I would say for that console too.
And then on top of that, it has status already established in that console as top 10 retail games, already staple holy grail. People actively are searching for this game. The difference between Rise of the Robots is the cart is worth $20 because the game is shit. Nobody gives a shit about that game, but the scarcity of it is so high, and people who collect for that console are not as Game Gear is not a popular console to collect for. Not a lot of people are going for complete Game Gear libraries with a $2,000 Rise of the Robots. So there is a big difference between the two, but I think the popularity of the console and the property and the legend of Bubble Bobble has a big part to do with the price, because the demand is there. There's no demand for Rise of the Robots except for the 5 people in this world who want that game and have save searches on every single website when it's posted because it's so scarce. So scarce. Complete in box. In a cart all day, but complete in box, no. But Bubble Bobble Part 2 I don't think is as scarce as people want to believe, but I think there's a dwindling number of them because people are holding on to them for their collections. They're not just swapping them and trading them. It's Bubble Bobble Part 2. Once you have one in your collection, you're not letting it go.
Yeah, I'm never getting rid of mine.
And that's the difference, is we're starting to see less of them, but I think there is a ton of them out there, and they're already sitting in collections. So you're not going to be seeing them so much, and that does have something to do with it as well, where it does look like they're scarce, but they're not. It's the same thing as I don't know, Pokemon Emerald. They're not scarce, but people are holding on to them. This is a game that people hold on to because of what it is. In that aspect, this is a long-term hold kind of game. It's not, let me buy it and flip it and make a little bit of extra cash. Unless you find this thing at a garage sale for $2, people know what this is. It's not a scarce game, especially within NES collectors and especially within retro collectors. Now, long-term, I have a problem with thinking this is going to retain being as popular as it is with the next couple generations coming up, because the people like us who grew up in the cartridge era, we know of these titles and we coexisted with them, but then you've got to think of people who grew up in their first console was 360 or their first console was PS4 era. Are they going to hold old cartridge games to a high standard as we do? So when all of us old farts start to die off and our collections go back into the market, are people going to want Bubble Bobble in that same sense? And I don't think so.
I don't mean to cut you off. I just had a horrible thought. Like, these kids nowadays, their Nintendo for us is like the PS1.
That's what I'm saying.
They're fucking old, bro.
Yeah. So I think the popularity of cartridge is going to start dwindling. I think there's obviously going to be a group of people who really want it. Just like you guys are interested in things older than NES that you know, like Atari. Like, you grew up with Atari, but there's shit older than that you appreciate. I don't think it's going to be as commonplace. I don't think there's going to be people who are like diehard new collectors. Like, all the posts I see all the time, they're like, new collectors, I'm going for GameCube. I'm a new collector, I just started collecting, I'm going for PS2. They're not going for old shit. Because A, it's already expensive. B, everyone already owns it. Mm-hmm. And like, C, they don't have that nostalgia for it like everyone who is buying them currently do. So once all these old collections that have been built up go back into the market because either they're passed down and kids don't want them, they sell them off because someone died. Like, I don't think they're going to retain as so much as other stuff in like 30 years. I could be wrong, but that's just my speculation.
I don't think you can say anyone's right or wrong on it because we don't know. I think you frame your argument like, yes, is this going to hold or not based on the staying power of like the Nintendo name. Because I think we can all agree Atari's dead because Atari doesn't exist anymore. Yes. Only old farts and me and Brian for some reason care about Atari because we grew up on it.
And like, Atari used to be very popular to collect for.
Yeah.
And I'm always wondering if Nintendo is going to do the same. And I don't think it will be as bad because it does have big properties on it like Mario and Zelda and Metroid. But some of the other ones, I think they may fall off a little bit. But it's hard for me to imagine what it's going to look like in 30 years, especially with a whole demographic of people who don't care about cartridge-based games.
Or even owning a physical copy of a game in general. I mean, you look at the stats, and it's a dying, dwindling thing. And
especially in this economy right now, too, people aren't looking at collecting because they have expendable income. Like, they're like, I'm getting digital games on sale because that's all I can afford. I'm never buying physical. And, like, why would you? They don't have houses to put their shit in because nobody can buy them.
Yeah. Take it a step further. I was just talking to somebody that listens to the podcast, shout out Mark, and he was like, I got all EverDrives because, like, I'm going to go buy WWE belts instead because I can say there's a way to actually play this without buying it. I'd rather just do that and go buy something else I enjoy, which... I mean, I think a lot of people EverDrives are so approachable and they're easy to get now, and it's like there's no headache to any of it. Plus, like, people are so smart on technology that aren't people intimidated by going to get a ROM anymore, you know?
I don't want to sit here and make it sound like I'm saying collectors are a dying breed because we're not, but I think the types of collectors that are going to be popping up in the next couple decades are very different than what this generation of collectors is very different.
I 100% get your point. I think the money's not dead because they have more of it, but like, I don't think there's as many people going out trying to get a complete NES library as there was even 10 years ago. Part of it's that you're priced out from it, sure.
Yeah, that's a big point. Is I think a huge part of the population is priced out of a lot of stuff. So like, why would they collect for NES when they can't afford anything from the console? They can be just like, fuck that console, I'll buy something that I can afford, and still get that satisfaction of collecting a game. And maybe they'll say, I'll buy one game, but it's not going to be Bubble Bobble Part 2. Yeah, it'll be it'll be a Mario, or it'll be the original Zelda. Yeah. It'll be something like that. I don't think Bubble Bobble is going to survive in that sense in 30 years because everybody who knows it is a holy grail isn't going to give a shit about it being a holy grail in 30 years.
It's interesting, and you can't correlate video games with other collecting hobbies, and that's where like, a lot of people failed, to be blunt. It's not the same thing as a comic book. Yep. Like, if this was a comic book, this would be no-brainer. It's worth it because you have decades and decades and decades of material to go off. This is the first appearance. Like, no one.
Well, comics are weird because they have almost a historical value tied to them, and games don't. Games are all about what's popular in the market at that point in time. It's so, what's the word? Shifting, I suppose.
Evolving, moving, changing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not stagnant. It's not surefire. Superman's always going to be Superman first appearance, Batman super appearance. Like, Batman and Superman and Spider-Man exist in history as icons, and so their first appearances are worth it. And you kind of see that in games with Zelda. Okay, the first Zelda game isn't as expensive as other ones, but the first Pokemon games are expensive because they're seen as these historical iconic points in time. Yep. Bubble Bobble Part 2 is not. And I think that's where it might fall off in the future.
See, that's where like the counter argument is like the Nintendo I think is always going to be the Nintendo. It's always going to be the NES. Like I said, your parents still refer to it no matter what console you're playing. You're playing Nintendo? No, this is a PS5 controller, but right on. It's a weird thing, man. And to sit there and be like 30 years we don't know, it's absolutely correct, we don't know. But like the NES is how many years old already?
The NES exists as an icon, but how many people who are enjoying the Switch right now are playing NES classics?
Right.
They're playing
I
Super
definitely
Nintendo
understand
and
your
64.
That's the point I was going to make.
I
Yeah.
understand your
The
argument.
16-bit era aged far more gracefully than the 8-bit era. Now, even you said, Barry, like you have trouble playing 8-bit games. 'cause
It's hard for me to do.
I
It's
don't
hard
think-
for me to
I
enjoy
don't think you
them.
can say the same about 16-bit games. There's game companies now making games like 16-bit games because
And
they're
they still look so good.
right.
Right.
They aged great. Now, like 8-bit aged way better than Atari, obviously.
Right.
Well, I think there's going to be a generation. It's like I can't even do this 8-bit bullshit. Okay, we got people talking about fucking frames per second and act like they can't play anything but
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
It's actually
I mean,
really
that's a
funny.
good
I saw a
point.
review for this game, and the guy was like, "Oh, he was being sarcastic, but he was like, "Oh, there's not 60 frames a second." But I was like, "Oh wait, he's not being sarcastic. Like, dude, it's an NES. Chill."
It is a good point to bring up because there are a lot of games, especially indie studios too. But even with things like Octopath Traveler with the 2D, 3D style, like the 16-bit pixel art style is seen as more of a art style of gaming than a generation at this point, because you can do so many things with that art style still and still have an involved mechanic system or game system or story. But you don't see people making 8-bit art style games, because why would you make 8-bit art style when you can have beautiful 16-bit
Way easier to
and it
animate.
still be relevant to modern time?
Right.
So 8-bit is falling off. We're not seeing people making replications of Master System games. We're seeing them remake them because everyone wants Wonder Boy and it's, a fun game. But we're not making new games in an 8-bit style. We're making them in a 16-bit style. NES is not going to survive very much longer, except for the people who are like set collectors, retro collectors. Like, you are a collector that has an interest in that.
I think
if anything can survive that stigma, though, I think it is the NES. To be fair,
yeah, maybe
because it is the
Maybe,
NES. If
yeah.
it wasn't the NES, I'd be like, yeah, 100%.
I mean, it's the same thing as Master System. If you want to compare another 8-bit console, Master System by far and large has not survived.
it won't. I mean, it wasn't a success like the NES. NES
Right.
birthed the video game availability in your home in North America as we know it. You know what I mean? Atari had a boom, but it died, and it was really embarrassing.
I think there's a lot less of appreciation for that now, though.
I do too, because it's so commonplace. Everyone grew up with a game console in their house. We all had, the generation under us all had a PS2 that was their DVD player in their living room too. It was just there. It wasn't like, holy shit, a game console.
I mean, you got kids now, you hold a PlayStation 1, they're like, what is that? And I'm
Yeah.
like, it's not even that old.
No. So
Like, they don't care about some of the older stuff. Like, there are people who have a slight interest of going back a smidge, but not that far. It's probably like my age group. I have no interest in going back as far as Atari. Like, absolutely none. Anything older than that too? No, I don't. None whatsoever. And I think the next generations after me are going to feel the same way about Nintendo, where they're going to want their 1, 2, 3 game.
they'll have
That's
to put,
it.
They're gonna have to put out, if they put out NES games, like big ass compilations with like huge amounts on them, because no one's gonna waste their time like going out and looking for even the legacy titles like your Mario's and your Metroids. Like, they're gonna play the remakes and shit instead of go back and play the NES ones.
Well,
Good
and
thing
that's
Nintendo's
why I
so good
pointed.
at preserving their games.
That's why I
Right.
pointed out is like it's going to be that one piece in your
Yep.
collection that you're like, I'm a really big Zelda fan. I really want Zelda 1 and 2 on NES, and the only reason I want them, I don't even own a Nintendo. These people
Yeah.
aren't going to own Nintendos who are buying these pieces. They're going to see them as collectibles.
Yep.
It's exactly what it's going to be, but people aren't going to buy a Nintendo to buy a Bubble Bobble Part 2 because they love the series so freaking much, because the series is so supported in modern day, and they made an incredible, amazing Bubble Bobble Part 45 that just like changed the landscape and brought in all these Bubble Bobble fanboys like From Software does. It's not happening.
Right. The next Bubble Bobble game is probably gonna be on a phone. Let's be realistic.
So Bubble
There's
Bobble
Release 4 on the Switch.
will stay expensive, but it's going to be for like the high echelon of collectors who have money.
So weird to think of collecting that way, but it's a hard argument to argue against.
It's kind of interesting. You brought up Rise of the Robots and Game Gear earlier. I think if we threw that game complete in box in a yard sale, like there'd be people like, oh, it's a video game. There's only how many people out of 100 do you think we know? Oh fuck.
No, around here, none.
Maybe one or
That's
two.
why I bought that
Being
game.
extremely optimistic, one or two. I think.
No, I don't think
I said
so.
extremely optimistic, but I think like honestly, like 0 to 1 is probably the correct answer.
I mean, so think about it this way: like you go into in the game store I got this from was a very popular chain in our area.
Sitting there for a minute.
And you go into a game store like that and you see a Bubble Bobble Part 2. Everyone going in there is going to go, holy shit, a Bubble Bobble Part 2. And sitting right next to it, it's going to be a Rise of the Robots complete unbox on Game Gear that's worth the same amount, and they won't even look at it because they have no absolute clue. Bubble Bobble has a whole theme about it that draws people to it. And
it's got the story going back to the forums days, because I remember before we knew about this, a lot of people thought this was a rental exclusive. It's not. Like, you don't even see them with Blockbuster stickers and shit on them. But, like, the internet story was that this was, like, this, you could only get it through rental stores and it's solo print. I do think it's probably scarce. I don't know if it's necessarily... That's the thing. I agree people are holding on to them. It's not... They're not trading them constantly. But I do think it's pretty scarce.
I still think this is extreme. I think it's pretty rare still, man. I think there's probably more rare shit on NES, but...
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it's not a rare game. I just don't think it's as scarce as people are probably believe in their head, where they're like, I'm never going to see one in my life ever.
I've only seen 2, to be fair, in person. Online, whatever, but mine and one other one's the only ones I've seen.
So, all that to say, like, I think in this time period, I think Bubble Bobble is worth it.
Yeah.
As a collectible, as an iconic piece of NES library. Past that... It's really hard for me to say it's going to be a really good long-term hold. Like, we're not talking like a long-term hold like an Action Comics 1. Like, that will just...
No.
I get
that's
your
a
argument.
whole different thing. But, like, to me, like, in this current day and age of collecting and the mindset and the generation that we live in and collect in right now, yes. That being said, when you die in 50 years, at that point in time, is it going to be worth holding on to that long? I don't know.
If there's a planet in 50 years.
I don't know. It'd be worth it at that point.
See, that's... My gut tells me yes, just because of the NES and staying power, but I could be completely wrong.
Because maybe on the flip side, in 50 years, this game is so expensive. It is like a $200,000 game. I would say it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. There's no reason for it to be worth
For
that
something
much
to be that
money.
much, you have to be talking like Mario.
It had
Pokemon,
this
like,
would have had to do something for the landscape of video game history.
this is the first 3D game ever.
For some
something,
reason.
yeah, like
I'm not going to say it's not going to be expensive in the future, but worth it in the future. I have a trouble saying yes to that.
This is a really interesting one, because I think it's super valid points that you bring up. For the type of collecting now, yeah, it is a holy grail. Is it going to stay that way?
It's really sad for me to say that, though, because like this is the best NES game I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It has got an incredible soundtrack. I think
It's a
the
weird
gameplay is really fun, even though it's really hard. I think it's really fun. So everything about this game reads to me as like a really well-developed, really fun-playing game that a lot of people could enjoy, but I just think...
I think it's the story that goes with it really does add to
the
it.
scope.
Though.
No one cares about the gameplay. They care about the collectability of it.
Yeah, maybe it's the lack of popularity in an IP sense isn't going to hold on to this game. But like you said, they don't care about this game or what it means to anything. They just know it's a rare NES game. You could swap Bubble Bobble Part 2 with Bubble Bobble Part 3 and people probably wouldn't know the difference because they're just like, oh, that's the rare NES game. I need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Kind of a damn shame.
the game of itself, I think it's a great game.
Yeah.
But I don't think the game has anything to do with the price in this one,
I agree.
whatsoever.
I think
Is
there's
it a game that's worth $500? No, but it's a great game.
most of the really valuable NES games suck. That's like kind of a little Samson being an exception. It being like an average game that everyone acts like is good because it's $10,000, but it just doesn't suck. As part of the reason why it even cost a little more. This one's actually a really fun game. It's a good game. Like if this was a $20 game, a lot of people would have this in their collection.
It's interesting to be like a comic collector and a game collector. It's like we buy comics and we see the rarities for very different reasons. And like I think it tried to bleed over into comics recently when they were like low print, 6 print, little bit limited numbers. But I'm like, there's nothing in that content that's worth anything. Just because there's 4 of them made, you guys want them, but like this comic book has nothing to do with anything. Where then you've got a million freaking copies of the first appearance of Spider-Man 2099 that are worth less than this low print. So I don't think it's lasting in comics. I think low print numbers don't last as much, especially with stuff now.
Manufacture the low print yourself.
Yeah.
It's not an organic low print. We designed this in mind with only being 1,000 copies available.
Well, and then even limited run games makes very limited numbered games. Like, they're just like, they're putting PS4 games out. They say, we're only limiting 1,000 copies of this game, and these aren't worth $500. I guarantee you there's less copies of that 1,000 limited run game than Bubble Bobble that exists in the world.
You want to talk about something that's a whole episode topic one day, but
yeah,
they don't hold value.
So I
Spoiler.
think just correlating print numbers to games is not a good factor to just, that's the reason why I'm buying this game. That's not a good reason.
It's fairly a new thing. We talked about it in the last time we recorded, actually. It's a fairly new word in the collecting sphere, but it's something you kind of have to like look at, but you can't base your whole purchase on that idea nowadays, I feel like. But it is something that's kind of like entered the lexicon of game collecting, but it's not a do or die.
On that same note, you see people all the time saying this game's not good, and everyone replies to, it doesn't matter if the game's good or not. There's not a lot of them.
You know, people actually
playing the fucking game then.
Sorry, one more. Do you know people actually looking for low print games, or people trying to sell you low print games? That's what I generally see. Is like people selling it, tell you it's low print. I don't see people going, I'm only looking for low print games. Like,
so I think it's all really valid points. I definitely think there's two ways of thinking on this. Barry, I think, what was your overall answer?
Yes, currently.
Nate?
I ain't betting against NES, yes.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I was really torn going into this. That's why I think this was an interesting one. I think Barry's point's super valid, but my gut's like, hey, the NES is already 40 years old. I'm not betting against Nintendo. I'm going to go with yes. But again, if you want to play this, the first game's a fun game, and it's only $20. And yeah, it's not Bubble Bobble 2. It's a different game. And I know this is where I'm going to shoot myself in the foot, because if you listened before, previous episodes have been like, oh, you've got to pay to play it. They're not going to release this game. They're not going to put it in a compilation. They're not going to do a remaster.
Do you guys know if this is on the Nintendo's online service?
I don't think so.
I don't believe so.
I don't think it's ever been released any other way. You have to sail the high seas if you want to play this or buy a cart.
That being considered, I also think that if they re-release this game for a compilation of any kind, I don't think it would affect the value.
I don't either.
Right. Yeah. It's a really
the alternative is it may increase the value. So if they put this game on like the Nintendo Switch Online, like people can play it just to play it, and then they may be more interested in it. I think any more visibility for this game would increase the price more. I don't think saying, well, I can get it digitally for $10 would drop the price on this one.
I haven't seen like a whole lot of games go on the eShop and get decked. Like, Musha's still very expensive. It's on the eShop.
It doesn't happen often, but we already talked about this with Golden Sun and Minish Cap. Like, they went up when they went on the Nintendo shop. This one being unavailable to play in any other format, I don't think would hinder this game's price currently if they re-released it of any kind.
My closing argument, I think this game is definitely worth playing. It's a fun little game. I think it does enough to warrant itself for being a sequel, but goddamn, $500 is a lot of money. But overall, I'm going to go with worth it also. It's an interesting one. It's the thing. Surface level, I think everyone's like, oh, that's a lot of money, fuck that. But this one's got a lot more meat on the bone than you think just by looking at it. So, in conclusion, that's 3 S's. Doesn't happen very often. Pretty interesting. Did not see that coming. But what do you guys think? Let us know on our socials. And I want to thank you all for listening. We've had a little bit of growth recently. Goes a long way. We appreciate that tremendously. Thank you, everybody, and happy hunting. Keep collecting. Don't let my Bubble Bobble II depreciate in the future, 20 years from now, 40 years from now.
5-star reviews, 5-star bubbles, 5-star everything.
So, Barry, you want to tell us what's next?
Next episode, we're going to talk all about collector's editions, since we're a collector's podcast. Are they still relevant? Are they worth buying? Do you have any? Have they ruined the collector's market? Have they made it better? Are they shitty? Are they really cool? All in between. Look, collector's editions.
Bet. Collectors of Bros, Collector's Editions.
Collector's Editions episode on Collecti-Bros. Collecti-Bros Collector's Edition.
It's almost as confusing as the Bubble Bobble lore.
No, it's not.